Hello everyone, welcome to this video. Today we're going to be talking about the Daedric artifacts and ranking them. I'm going to be ranking them according to legendary difficulty. I will tell you if the quest is too difficult and potentially give you tips as to how to complete them. Also, for this ranking, I'm going to ignore the Anniversary Edition weapons and armors and content because that stuff is kind of in a league of their own. It came quite late to Skyrim and it's very powerful. Anyways, without any further ado, let's get into the ranking. Okay, so we're going to get started with Azura Star and the Black Star. The general consensus across the Skyrim community is that the Black Star is better. The reason is because it can capture only human souls, while the White Star can capture only creature souls. Generally speaking, it's easier to kill a level 1 bandit and get a black soul gem that way than to have to kill a Draugr Deathlord or Dragon Priest or a Mammoth to get the equivalent Grand Soul Gem. This is at least the way it's supposed to work. Depends a little bit on what kind of patches you're using, mods, or which version of Skyrim you're playing. So I'm going to give the White Star a B because at the end of the day, it's a reusable soul gem. The other benefit to this is that you get a follower, but there's a lot of followers in Skyrim, so I don't feel like Arenia is that great. And the Black Star is going to get an S. We will return to this star a couple of times over and over again because it is a staple of your entire build if you happen to go with it, as it can power a lot of the other Daedric artifacts that you're going to be finding, or any of the other weapons that require charging at all. But the thing is, you would never really use the White Star over the Black Star, so that's why the Black Star gets an S and the White Star gets a B. The quest for these stars can be pretty difficult. Although you can do them at level 1, you will fight a lot of mages. The first half of the quest you're fighting frost, and the second part of the quest you're fighting pretty much mages to do fire damage. I would highly recommend that you do this quest before level 12-ish, because once you enter the Star of Azura, or if you're in Ilinolta's Deep, the mages in there will be using novice spells up until around level 12, which at that point they will upgrade to apprentice spells, and that is a big step up in difficulty. Now is a good time to mention the Helm of Ingol as well. I have absolutely no idea why people do not talk about this helmet or use it at all. Basically, it's a Nordic helmet. It's kind of like a Draugr helmet. It gives you 30% frost defense, and the only thing you need to do to get this helmet is walk into a dungeon, take it off the boss's corpse, and run out. There's only one thing you need to worry about, and that's the boss hitting you with frost breath. That's the only thing that can sort of be difficult, but you can make a quick save, pick up the helmet. If you fail, you just try again. And now you should have an excellent helmet that counts as steel plate quality. Now, you know, a lot of people like the Nord because of the defense against frost, but I don't understand why people don't give the same praise to this helmet, which can be used on any character. It can actually be stacked with the Nord to be able to pretty much right off the gate have 80% resistance to frost. The Helm of Ingol is excellent. It's excellent. I would highly recommend any warrior, heavy armor warrior, to definitely pick this up. It's a free steel plate helmet with 30% resistance to frost. The next Daedric artifact is Dawnbreaker. This one's quest unlocks at level 12, and the enemies in the dungeon are not that difficult, but the boss himself is pretty difficult. He has 2 stages, one of which he uses frost, the other one he uses fire. And because you have to be level 12 to get him, he already starts using apprentice or maybe even adept spells at this point. So I will admit that the quest to get this sword is very hard. You will have to stack a few, maybe elemental resistance stones, a few potions. If you bring a follower, if you bring conjured Atronachs, it's significantly easier though. But Dawnbreaker itself, I think, is very good. You have to be careful if you're a vampire while using it. When you kill an undead, it triggers an explosion that turns or sets undead on fire or incinerates them. It's very awesome. One of my favorite things about this weapon in particular is that the charge on it lasts for a very long time. We will be talking about a Daedric artifact later on that can help you maintain the charge of this weapon when you combine it with the Star of Azura. But certainly the Dawnbreaker is one of the best Daedric artifacts in my opinion. It gets an A tier for that reason. It can also be, you know, dual wield with other things, though you can't really use Elemental Fury with it. But whenever you're fighting vampires, and as a matter of fact, there is a Daedric artifact on this list where you have to fight vampires to get it. And I actually ranked that Daedric artifact pretty highly as well. I would recommend it for heavy armor warriors. You can use Dawnbreaker if you want to. However, the quest for Dawnbreaker unlocks after the quest for this quest in particular, but depends on a little bit on what order you want to do this stuff in. When you're fighting vampires, it's good. When you're fighting undead, it's good. And that's something that you do quite a bit in Skyrim, I would say. Next up is the Ebony Blade. Now, initially, when I looked at this weapon, I thought it's pretty good because it has the Absorb Health enchantment. It's a sword, a 200 weapon that swings as fast as a one-handed sword. But the problem with it is that you unlock it at level 20. By this point in the game, you probably have your build pretty well set up. And also the fact that you cannot upgrade this weapon, you'll probably have weapons that will do more damage than it. Now, if you are a character that doesn't use enchanting, the Absorb Health enchantment is really useful for you. But if you don't have that restriction, I just tend to find that there are other weapons that do the job better than this thing. And honestly, the only reason is because of the high level. If this thing unlocked at like level 10, for example, I would argue it would be one of the better weapons to get. But this one competes, for example, let's say with Volendrunk, which is another great Daedric artifacts that we're going to talk about later. Volendrunk you can unlock at level 9, and when you're playing on Legendary, every level, everything has to be very well planned out, essentially. So your build is just so good that this thing cannot really come in and make a huge difference to your build. The quest to get it is actually not that hard. You unlock it after 20, you have to talk to the barkeep in Whiterun, and then you just talk to a bunch of NPCs around Dragon's Reach, and eventually you unlock this sword, unless you want to do the wall glitch. But you know, it's a good sword. I'd recommend checking it out, because again, you don't really have to do anything in particular other than spend maybe 15-20 minutes to get it, or 10-15 minutes to get it. It's not that hard. The quest is not that hard. Just keep it in your arsenal. It's not very heavy, so you can just bring it out, bring it with you on your character in case you come across a fight where you want to use this thing. But because of the fact that you cannot upgrade it and it competes with other two-handed weapons that can be pretty good, you may find that you don't use the Ebony Blade that often. I'm gonna give it a B tier though. I don't think it's horrible, but it doesn't quite come up to the A because it's most likely not gonna be your primary weapon. All right, so the Ebony Male, this thing kind of suffers from a little bit of the same thing that I would say the Ebony Blade suffers from. You get it at level 30, and the quest is pretty cool. You actually get, I believe, a full set of Ebony, not including the helmet if I'm not mistaken. But the problem is the super duper high level. I mean, by this point in the game, your build is almost complete. And my main problem with the Ebony Male is that because it's heavy armor, it competes with Dwarven armor after you get the Ancient Knowledge quest. This is one of the best quests that you can do in the entire game, and basically what it does is that it makes every single piece of Dwarven armor 15% stronger, which brings Dwarven armor up to the equivalent of Ebony. Now, granted, the Ebony Male has a little bit higher defenses than normal Ebony armor, but it's still not enough because the Dwarven armor can be upgraded easier because you don't need the Arcane Blacksmithing. By the time you're level 30, you could potentially have 3 different sets of Dwarven armor. If you were the Steedstone, for example, you can have one set that has, you know, a certain amount of enchantments on it, another set that has another certain amount of enchantments on it, and so on and so on. Because the Steedstone, every single piece will weigh nothing. So you can have, you know, 1,000 pieces of Dwarven armor if you want to, as long as you're all wearing them on your character. Unfortunately, the Ebony Male competes with Dwarven armor, and Dwarven armor just blows pretty much anything else out of the water. You can easily hit the armor cap with it. You can get it after level 14 when you can do the Ancient Knowledge quest. And as far as the enchantments on this thing, making you stealthy and the poison, they're not really that good. I mean, if you're going for the sneak route, you should just go full blown out for the sneak route. And if you're going for the poison, if you've ever played a Dark Elf and you have the Ancestor's Wrath thing that does 8 points of damage to enemies that are close by, you'll know that on Legendary and even Master difficulty, it doesn't do anything to the enemy. So these 2 enchantments are almost irrelevant. The armor looks pretty cool. I recommend doing the quest if you want some ebony pieces. There's also a mine there with a lot of corundum, but level 30 is just way too far out there to be able to make this thing anything useful. I'm just gonna give it a C tier because I don't even think it goes into the B tier. The problem is just it competes with Dorman Armor, man. You can't. It's at the end of the day, right? It's a heavy chest piece, right? It's a heavy armor chest piece, and there are better heavy armor chest pieces. Next up, we have the Mage of Molag Bal. This mace can be unlocked at level 1 in Markarth. There are a couple of quests that you can actually do in Markarth, which I recommend. This is one of the best maces, or this is the best weapon you can have early game as a one-headed warrior. Now, admittedly enough, the quest to get the Mage of Molag Bal can be pretty difficult. You can get sent to 6 different locations, 2 of which are relatively easy, 2 of which are like medium difficulty, and 2 of which are pretty hard. It has 3 enchantments. 2 of them I would just kind of ignore. The fact that it does 25 stamina damage and 25 magic damage is not really that relevant. The charge on it runs out quite quickly. But the one you want to pay attention to is the Soul Trap enchantment, which can be very difficult to get early game or throughout the game period. The synergy between the Mage of Molag Bal and the Star of Azura is one that just elevates both of these artifacts to a completely different tier, in my opinion. You will have so much fun because when you combine these 2 weapons, you can essentially power all the other Daedric artifacts and all the other weapons that have charges to them at all, whether it's Dawnbreaker or some random staff, right? The synergy between these 2 weapons is amazing, and both of them can be acquired, or you can at least start the quest at level 1. So that is something that I would recommend that you do. Get the Star of Azura first, because there's a bigger drawback to doing the Star of Azura after level 12 as opposed to doing the Mage of Molag Bal after level 12. You will have to fight Forsworns. I'm going to give you a little bit of a strategy as to how you can make that a little bit easier when we talk about another Daedric artifact here in a moment. But the Mage of Molag Bal is essentially a Daedric quality mace. You will not, listen people, you will not be able to find a better one-handed weapon than the Mage of Molag Bal at level 1. So if you can manage the quest, for example using followers or Atronachs, although that is, followers and Atronachs are the great equalizer in Skyrim. There's almost nothing you can do, even on legendary difficulty, if you use followers and Atronachs. If you don't want to go that route and the quest is too difficult, wait a little bit, try your best to find another strategy. But if you happen to get the Mage of Molag Bal, you will be set to around level 30-ish. It does require the Arcane Blacksmithing perk, which you probably will not get until you are a pretty high level already, because power leveling smithing will leave other skills in the dust. So I would not recommend doing that. But you can keep it around for the Soul Trap enchantment and the synergy you make with the Star of Azura. Yeah, the Mage of Molag Bal is amazing. I highly recommend it. It's definitely an S tier, and it's just the best one-handed weapon. Early game is just the best one-handed weapon, no doubt. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Mask of Clavicus Vial and the Ruthful Ax. So this quest is unlocked at level 10. You have to clear out a dungeon full of vampires to get it. You can use Dawnbreaker for this quest, and that would certainly make it a little bit easier, but Dawnbreaker unlocks 2 levels after this though. However, this quest doesn't necessarily have to be very hard, because you get Barbas, which is a dog that cannot die, and he's able to follow you along for this quest or any other quest that you want, as long as you don't finish this one in particular. So Barbas is a follower that never stops following you, and I think there are only a certain amount of locations he can enter, like Skoldafn, the Thalmor Embassy, but for the most part he can follow you everywhere. It's kind of a cheat code in the game. Either way, for this quest in particular, you can use him, which makes it significantly easier. It's almost impossible to fail if you sort of use Barbas properly. At the end though, you get the choice between the Mask of Clavicus Vial or the Ruthful Ax. So I'm just gonna, the Ruthful Ax has so many bad things about it that is incredible. First off, it does not count as a Daedric artifact. It is the slowest swinging weapon in the game, period. Slower than any Warhammer. It has the worst enchantment on it, in my opinion, which is stamina damage. Same as you, the players, NPCs actually only need 1 stamina to power attack. To put that on the slowest swinging weapon in the game, I mean, good luck trying to drain anybody of their stamina. You have to kill a dog to get it, and you have to trade it for the Mask of Clavicus Vial. So if you get the Ruthful Ax, you can't get the Mask of Clavicus Vial. Yeah, no man, the Ruthful Ax, other than the fact that it looks pretty cool, has absolutely nothing going for it. Oh, it actually also only weighs 10 units, which is pretty useful, but it's just so backwards. It's very, very light for a 2-handed weapon, but it's the slowest weapon in the game. That doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense. Anyways, the Mask of Clavicus Vial is really the one you want to choose. It has 3 enchantments, one of which is not very useful. The magic enchantment is not something that you should really think about, the magic regeneration. But essentially this mask allows you to persuade, intimidate, and your prices are better when buying and selling. If you're someone who likes to do a lot of training with trainers, this mask can be pretty good. I think it's actually the second best thing in the game. The best headpiece for prices is the Blackguard's hood, which you have to do a little bit of the Thieves Guild storyline to obtain. Anyways, this thing counts as a Daedric helmet, so for combat, if you're just fighting physical damage, you could use the Mask of Clavicus Vial, and it's gonna be the best in slot gear, unless you're talking about some anniversary edition thing. Against frost, you could use the Helm of Ingol, and against physical damage, you could use the Mask of Clavicus Vial. The Ruthful Ax gets an F, the mask gets an A. It's probably gonna be the best headgear until you can actually start crafting armors yourself. Some people like the Mehrunes Razor. My problem with it is, well, first of all, the quests are pretty fun. You have to fight a few Forsworns here and there, a few Bandits Chiefs. It's like in 3 stages. I do like the fact that you have to collect the artifacts. The quest is fun, kind of hard. It unlocks level 20, which is quite late. But one benefit of the quest, and one of the reasons I always do it, is because you get 4 Daedra Hearts during this quest, and the room where you get the Daedra Hearts tends to reset quite often, and there are other goodies in that room as well. So I would recommend doing this even if you're not going to use it. It has a 1.98 chance, or almost a 2% chance to instantly kill your target, except Mirak and Karstag. However, Skyrim tends to round down, so I wouldn't be surprised if this thing only has a 1% chance to kill your target. For certain fights, it can be useful, but if your whole strategy is to just rely on that one-shot kill, you're not even really playing Skyrim. Like all other strategy, all skill, all of the dynamic from combat and from leveling up your character and all that stuff goes completely out the window. And most of the time, this thing is not going to be useful because most fights in Skyrim are not just do or die. You know, you're not just going to be plopped into a fight against a legendary dragon where you have to, within the first 10 seconds, one-shot him or he's going to one-shot you. Most fights are not like that in Skyrim. Most fights are stuff that you can actually deal with. Otherwise, you would just turn down the difficulty, which means that this weapon is not going to be useful most of the time. For example, let's say you're clearing out a dungeon. You can either use the Mage of Molag Bal, and in most encounters, you're going to finish the fight quicker because it does more damage, it has the stagger. And sometimes the Mehrunes Razor is actually going to just instantly kill the enemy, but that's not going to happen a lot of the time. It doesn't have a good stagger. It cannot be combined with Elemental Fury because it has the enchantment thing. So yeah, you're better off using a weapon that's going to benefit you most of the time. That's like the problem that I have with Mehrunes Razor. Now I can't really give it a super low rating because at the end of the day, that's a very, very powerful enchantment. But I'm not going to give it a super high rating. I think around the B tier is perfectly fine. If you take into account the fact that the quest is excellent because of those Daedra hearts, you know, yeah, it's not gonna get super low. That's all for the Mehrunes Razor. Let's move on to the next one. All right, the Augma Infinium. This one is a bit difficult to compare to other things as it's not like a weapon or an armor in itself. The Augma Infinium, the best way to kind of use this is to wait until you're level 95 in 5 skills. It gives you 5 points or 5 levels in either warrior skills, mage skills, or thief skills. So waiting to 95 and getting to 100 is the most efficient way to use it. What I have found, however, is that what happens when you have 5 skills at 95, you are such a high level already with your character that getting perk points isn't that difficult. Here's what I mean. The most efficient way to get perks in Skyrim is to take a couple of the magic skills into mastery level. So you do the ritual quest for them. Let's say, for example, illusion. You get illusion to 100 and then you do or 90 and then you do the illusion ritual spell. You have to use enchanting at the same time so you can make 4 pieces into 25%, you know, reduction to illusion spells. And now you can cast the master illusion spell over and over again. One cast of which will take you from level 15 to level almost to level 30. Perk points don't become very difficult anymore. By the time you can use the Augma Infinium as efficiently as possible, you know, because you have those high levels, you already have access to perk points in the first place. You know, so I'm not gonna give it like super low. I think it's, you know, around the B tier. Again, it is a one-time use only, which is another thing. The quest absolutely horrible, or you know, the part where you have to talk to Hermaeus Mora is absolutely horrible, but I'm not gonna give it lower for that. I think it's good. I would actually, because of what I mentioned, because of the fact that you only get to use it when you already are a high level, I would actually recommend just keeping it in your bookshelf because it looks awesome and you can have some satisfaction, some dopamine hits whenever you look at it, as opposed to just having it disappear. It would be nice if you could use it and it didn't disappear. Instead, it just stayed in your bookshelf, but you can never use it ever again. But yeah, this one's good, worth getting, but it isn't really all that. To be honest with you, you can easily level up a character to 100 without the help of the Augma Infinium. It would actually be a lot better if legendary skills weren't a thing. Because of legendary skills, this thing actually takes a hit. If legendary skills weren't a thing, there are some skills like lockpicking, destruction. There are a couple of skills that are quite difficult to get super duper high, which in that case, the Augma Infinium would be able to help you. Those skills may not necessarily be in the same tree, right? But yeah, it gets a B tier. It's pretty cool looking and pretty interesting artifact. Okay, next up we have the Ring of Namira. This one can also be started in Markarth, so I recommend you start this at the same time as the Mage of Molag Bal. Both of those quests take you to the Reach as well. The Ring of Namira unlocks level 1, and the quest isn't that difficult depending on if you know this little strategy. Basically what you can do, you can buy the Turn Lesser Undead spell from any court wizards, and whenever you do the quest, if you do it early, you'll be fighting normal Draugrs and Restless Draugrs. You can use the Repel Undead to like make one of them flee, and that way you make the fight into a 1v1. The difficult part can potentially be the boss though, but he is a melee warrior, so if you're good with your spacing and you have put enough points into health so that you don't get one-shotted, you at least have the chance to continuously fight him. You get a follower for this quest, which you don't have to use. You can use him if you want to. But the Ring of Namira, the common complaints that I hear about the Ring of Namira is that it's inconvenient. I'm not really sure how that makes any sense, because the way you feed with the Ring of Namira is the same way, you know, you loot. Looting is something everybody does. Another one is you don't fight that many humans, But then again, that would make the Star of Azura, the Black Star, sorry, that would make the Black Star useless, because that one is relying on the fact that you're fighting humans for it to actually be efficient. So I don't think that that is completely valid as well. And the other one, and another one is like that it's basically, you know, cannibalism. So if you're into the role-playing thing, you may not want to use it for that sense. But let me go over the positives of it before I give you kind of the conclusion. The Ring of Amira, when you equip it, gives you 50 points of stamina, which is permanent and very good. After you feed on a human corpse, it gives you 50 points of health and 50 health regeneration. That's not all though. You can actually feed on a corpse and take off the ring and keep the benefits of the health, the 50 health and the health regeneration. You'll lose the stamina though. But if you're a mage or a archer or something, when you have another ring that you want to use to benefit your build, you can feed with the ring in Amira, take it off, and then use your other ring. You'll keep the benefits for 5 minutes. This can also be stacked with the werewolf. So feeding on a human corpse and then turning into a werewolf maintains the 50 health that you can have. That's not all. On survival, this thing will actually keep your satiation. So when you feed with it, you remain satiated, which means you don't have to use your cabbage soups and all that kind of stuff. You can save up on those, which is like a double benefit essentially. And on survival, your health bar disappears even if you haven't healed fully. Your health bar disappears. The Ring of Amira, because you have the health regeneration, is not going to make your health bar disappear. I'm sure if you played survival, you know that you sometimes get into a fight and then you start looting or whatever, your health bar disappears, but you're not fully healed. So by the next time you get into a fight, you're half health and you're like, oh my God, what the hell happened, right? The Ring of Amira will prevent this from happening more often than not. So even though it only says that it gives you stamina, health, and health regeneration, there's a whole bunch of other factors that are overlooked, you know, from players with this thing. And it is a level 1 item. I'm gonna leave it with this. Let's imagine that Skyrim was an online game where players could attack you at any point, similar to like GTA 5 or something. Are you honestly telling me that players would forego the benefits of this ring, essentially 12 points of levels, just for the fact that you have to feed on a human corpse? This thing, if Skyrim was online, the Ring of Amira would be complete meta, because you could leave Helgen and by level 5, 6, you could have, maybe even lower than that, you could have a ring that would put you 12 levels ahead of everybody else. You would be rinsing people. So if you can forego the feeding aspect of the ring, you can. This thing is just gonna be one of the best Daedric artifacts that you can possibly have in the game. It's a ring. It weighs nothing. You know, it definitely gets an S tier, and you can combine it with the Mage of Molag Bal. What I mentioned earlier, you can, because both of these quests are in the Reach and started in Markarth, you can get the Ring of Amira. And that's going to make getting the Mage of Molag Bal a little bit easier, because the Mage of Molag Bal, you always have to fight Forsworns, which are humans. Next up is the Sanguine Rose, which is it's a very good staff. The quest for this one is one that is also universally liked in the Skyrim community. At level 14, whichever bar you happen to enter at or after level 14, that's where Sam Gweveen will appear, and you will be able to start the quest after speaking with him. This thing summons a level Dremora up to level 46. So it is a conjuration staff. It is an extremely good enemy or follower in this case. I don't tend to use conjuration to have followers, but this is something that makes the game significantly easier. You can also give the staff to one of your followers. You can use a combination of Azura and the Mage of Molag Bal to keep the charges up. The Sanguine Rose looks very good as well, but it essentially gets an S tier. It's undeniable that having a level like that Dremora Lord is gonna be better than most things you're gonna fight. It's like it will be able to solo so many fights from the get-go as soon as you can get it at 14. The quest is pretty fun too, and there isn't much to say. It's a conjuration spell. Like, what more can you really say? You can combine this with a follower and a dog and a horse, and you can just get a whole goddamn army. And it doesn't necessarily level up your conjuration, aside from when you recharge it after it loses its charges. But conjuring things don't necessarily level up your conjuration, so you can use it as a warrior and not worry too much about leveling up a skill that is not going to benefit you. Sanguine Rose, amazing S tier. And you can technically run past, because the quest is a bit difficult. So you can technically run past, maybe become ethereal or something. But you can do that with most dungeons in Skyrim, admittedly enough, because the location that it takes you have to fight mages, and mages are a hassle. You're already level 14, so they will be using most likely apprentice spells when you do this quest. So yeah, you can run past them, but then again, you can do that with most of the quests in the game. Just run to the end of the dungeon if that's what you want to do. So I'm going to classify the quest as difficult because I'm assuming that most people are not going to do that. Next, we got the Savior's Hide and the Ring of Hersine. I'm going to talk about the Savior's Hide first. This is a light armor piece that happens to look very good on female characters, and when you combine it with the Forsworn limbs pieces and the headgear potentially. It has magic defense, which is something that armor pieces do not have, and it also has poison defense, which is very, very good. You can combine it with a red guard or something like that. A lot of people tend to overlook poison damage until they play on legendary difficulty and they come up against Falmers and Charises. I think that the Savior's Hide is very, very good if you use light armor. Of course, if you don't use light armor, then it's like you wouldn't use it. It is very good. I'm going to give it an A tier if you happen to use light armor. Generally speaking, I prefer heavy armor. I might make a video talking about light versus heavy armor, but in the early stages of the game, I've come to find that light armor is a little bit better because you can use whatever stone you want. You don't have to use the Steed Stone. And the Dark Brotherhood armor, when you combine all of the pieces, it gets a bonus, a 25 points bonus, which makes it equivalent to steel armor, but you don't have the movement penalty. So early game, you could have the Lord Stone, which gives you even more armor, or the Atronach Stone, and you can combine it with light armor and then have this thing as part of your build. I will say though, the quest for it is quite difficult. Fighting Sinding and all those hunter warriors is really, really hard. What I tend to do is, after I become a werewolf, that's when I do the quest, because for the Ring of Hersine, you have to become a werewolf anyways. You cannot get the Ring of Hersine, or you cannot get the benefits of the Ring of Hersine without being a werewolf in the first place. And now I guess we can move on to talking about the Ring of Hersine. This quest, by the way, is a level 1, but it is very difficult to complete at level 1. The Ring of Hersine allows you to turn into a werewolf whenever you want. If you're playing on survival, it may be a little bit more useful because you don't want to wait. A way to like bypass that is just waiting the 24 hours. The werewolf form deserves a video on its own. Basically, the werewolf form allows you to control your human levels, because when you are a werewolf, you don't have to level up your normal character, which means the rest of the enemies stay at their level, at least the ones who aren't level locked. And as a werewolf, you can use Dragon Aspect, you can feed with the Ring and Amira before turning into a werewolf, and you can even use flesh spells, like alteration spells. So it allows you to plan a little bit how you're gonna engage the fight, essentially. And werewolves are really strong. The flinging attack of the werewolf is essentially like an infinite unrelenting force. Their stamina regeneration is very good. If you don't happen to have a horse and you're stranded, you can run with them. Yeah, the werewolves are pretty decent. I would argue it's like top 3 best playstyles in the game. And the Ring of Hersine definitely helps you with that. I don't really want to give it an A tier though, because I don't tend to. The thing about it is that it's useful, but you need to fight humans. And in order to fight humans, you need to do something. You need to go to very specific places like the Reach with Forsworns, or do the entirety of the companions to level up. Because in the companion storyline, you fight humans, right? Which that's what you need to do. You need to feed as a werewolf to be able to level it up. So once you turn into a werewolf, you can remain a werewolf, at least for the duration of that dungeon. So turning in on and off to werewolves isn't as useful as you might think. And also most players don't play on survival, which means you can just wait the 24 hours. Granted, this will reduce your shrine buffs and stuff like that, but that's something you need to keep in mind. It's gonna get a B tier though. I think it's very good, but it's not like something you're gonna use all the time. Next up, the Skeleton Key. This one is one that is, pretty damn annoying that you have to give up at the end of the quest. I would say if you didn't have to give up this key, it would definitely rank higher for me than where I'm going to put it. You get it at the end of the Thieves Guild, and it's an unbreakable lockpick. I know that there's a perk in the lockpicking tree, but never put perks into lockpicking. It is a complete waste. On Legendary, there are like 250 perks in Skyrim. You have to make the best use out of your perks if you're going to have as easy of a time as possible in this game. And putting perks into lockpicking is not a good idea. Also, getting the key and power leveling lockpicking is also not a good idea. Because let's say you get to level 80, 90 lockpicking, and then you turn in the key. Well, now you're fighting enemies that are way higher than your combat levels will be able to deal with. So that's not a good strategy either. I just tend to ignore this key for the most part, because lockpicking is just a matter of time. You don't need to do this. This is more convenient. This is why I'm saying, like, if you didn't have to turn it in, I would give it an A because of the convenience factor. You can get it and then you have it forever. But because you almost feel forced to have to turn it in, I'm going to give it a B. Not quite going to give it a C, because at the end of the day, it is quite useful. It is fun, has obviously a good quest behind it, the whole Thieves Guild. But But yeah, not an A, not a C. I'm going to give it a B tier. Okay, so the Skull of Corruption. This is another Daedric artifact that you can unlock at level 1. It starts off by doing 20 points of damage, and when you use it on someone who's sleeping, you make the damage go up to 50. I've actually learned during this video that this staff can actually be used on multiple opponents, kind of like an AoE spell. One good thing that I can think of, or one good way that I can think of using this staff is obviously crowd control, but also you can control your levels because your character will not be leveling up as you're using the Skull of Corruption. The quest for it is quite good. You do have to kill Irandir at the end. If you don't kill him, you get him as a follower. But you might notice with this thing that it will eventually stop being as effective as your actual character starts to level up. And the DPS of it is slightly lower than weapons. Also, the Skull of Corruption doesn't quite do 50 points of damage because of legendary difficulty. Next up, Spellbreaker. This shield kind of suffers a little bit from the same thing that the Ebony Male and the Ebony Sword suffers from. Now, granted, it only unlocks at level 15. Right, but the dungeon that you have to go through is extremely long, so you are very likely to be over level 20, especially if you do this on legendary, because you get a lot of XP. So you're likely to be a higher level, and this thing is very good against melee damage because it's one of the best shields for deflecting melee or absorbing melee, and it's one of the best shields for magic as it gives you the ward thing, 50 points of damage against the ward. However, in order to get this shield, the quest takes you through a bunch of warriors, and it takes you to through a high-level mage. So the things that this shield is good for, you already have to be extremely proficient to be able to get the shield in the first place, right? If you've never fought Orchendor, the boss of this level, my god, you will have a headache against this boss. I actually thought my game was broken the first time I fought him because he kept teleporting and teleporting. He's one of the most annoying boss fights because he teleports to like a higher ground. So you have to run around up some stairs. And meantime, he's shooting with ice and shock spells. And it's just super, super annoying. He has a lot of health. And sometimes the fight can take 20 minutes. The thing about it is that you have to be already good at dealing damage and absorbing or taking magic damage. Realistically, on legendary difficulty, you might be able to finish this quest when you're level 30, 40, maybe even 50. Right? By that point, why do you really need a shield that protects you against magic? Or protects you against a lot of physical damage? You can already tank it, as is evident by the fact that you made it through the quest in the first place. And the werewolf form is not very good against him because he can teleport even in Ragdoll, I believe. He's extremely good. I don't think you can actually unrelenting force him to make him fall on the ground because he automatically wards it. I could be wrong on that, but I don't think he can actually fall on the ground unless you fling him with the werewolf, but he can still teleport. So it's just, he just gets free teleports whenever he takes too much damage. It's absurd. I'm not going to give the shield super low rating because if you're somebody who, you know, you have your sword, you have your shield, and you don't want to be thinking about hotkeying and switching weapons and all that kind of stuff, the Spellbreaker is a solid option for blocking. It's a solid option for blocking spells, right? You don't have to think about it. You just go into combat and you know you have something that's going to take care of you. One thing you need to keep in mind is fireballs and those kinds of spells, because when enemies rapid fire them, the shield is going to break after 2 fireballs. So you're going to like be stunned for a little bit. And some mages are just absurd with the whole, yeah, it's ridiculous. Against dragons themselves, it can be really good because it's a damage over time as opposed to just boom, one big point of damage. So Spellbreaker is one of the best shields in the game, technically, right? So it's going to get an A tier, but good luck trying to get this thing. It's absolutely ridiculous. Right, so next up is Volendrunk. This one unlocks at level 9. And initially when I saw this weapon, I thought to myself that it was way too difficult to try and get it because you do have to fight a giant. However, we keep coming back to the damn werewolf. The werewolf has an infinite, unrelenting force ability with the flinging animation. This is gonna be your way to kill this giant in order to get Volendrunk. Now, because giants are very much like either yes or no. You can stagger them with your weapon because they stagger very easily. But if you mess up, they just send you to the moon, and it's over, right? With the werewolf form, you can do this relatively easily. Now, level 9 is quite early to kill a giant, but it can be done. It's not super hard if you happen to be a werewolf, right? The Daedra Heart, you need a Daedra Heart and Troll Fat. Troll Fat you can just buy from Alchemist. You may have to run around a little bit, but it's not super rare. And the Daedra Heart you can get from your Vasker. Do the basket over the head trick on Cadillac, or just don't pick it up, but hold it by holding your interaction button and move it to another room next to where the Daedra Heart is next to where Cadillac is sitting. Move it and then put it on the floor, pick it up. Just keep in mind that the companions count as guards, so if they ever catch you doing a crime, or if you have them following you for no reason, it may be because you have committed a crime, and they just, you know, it's a bug, a glitch in the game. But Daedra Hearts can be really difficult to get otherwise, and I would recommend getting this thing as soon as possible, because it is, I think it's an ebony quality hammer, but it swings as fast as a two-handed greatsword. So it has most likely has the stagger potential of a warhammer, but the swing speed of a greatsword. The enchantment of it is horrible. I would not recommend thinking about it. I mean, Vegetable Soup does the exact same thing. It only takes like 20 hits to completely deplete the enchantment, but it's gonna be one of the best two-handed weapons that you can get early on in the game. It will be outshined later on when you start getting, for example, Dwarven armor and Dwarven weapons, and you can upgrade those things to superior. But if, for example, you really value the stagger potential of hammer while having the swing speed of a greatsword, the Volendrunk can certainly, you can certainly keep it around for a little bit longer. It will come a point where, you know, when you start getting into flawless and stuff like that. So yeah, just Volendrunk, highly recommend. In my opinion, it's S tier. Highly recommend getting this thing. Let's move on to the next one. Last but definitely not least is the Waba Jack. This is another weapon that I didn't quite understand early on in the beginning, because people don't really talk about what I'm about to tell you regarding this thing. Another one that unlocks at level 1, you could technically exit Helgen, go to Solitude, start the quest, and when you're finished with the quest, you will still be level 1, because you don't have to do any actual combat in this quest. And the Waba Jack can certainly help you get other Daedric artifacts. Now, the whole randomness aspect of the Waba Jack, that's kind of what threw me off, you know, similar to the Mehrunes Razor. I never like things to be random, as consistent as possible, but there is a way that you can use the Waba Jack and keep it consistent against certain enemies. If an enemy cannot be turned into a sweet roll or a crab, like a Dwarven Automaton when you do the Ancient Knowledge quest at the end, or like dragons, or like giants, or like mammoths, this thing will only do the projectile damage. And these projectile damages ignore legendary difficulty. So when you're using this thing offensively, you are effectively playing on adept difficulty. And because it's a projectile, it's especially good against dragons. You can, for example, have a ward, a lesser ward in your left hand to protect yourself against the dragon's projectile, and you can use the Waba Jack against the dragon to try and kill him. It does require charges, but then again, we are back full circle to the Mage of Molag Bal Star of Azura combination, right? The Waba Jack is absolutely excellent. I would highly recommend getting this thing first thing. We finished with the Waba Jack, but actually if you're a serious one or two-handed warrior, I would probably recommend getting the Waba Jack, mainly one-handed, because that way you can combine it with the Mage of Molag Bal. Getting the Waba Jack early, because you're not going to level up at all, right? And it's going to help you against so many enemies, especially after you get the Mage of Molag Bal. The Mage of Molag Bal, Waba Jack, and Star of Azura combination can get you extremely far, because you can just, you know, whenever you fight a boss, whenever you have a fight, especially when it's 1v1, it doesn't really matter that you have those random effects, because eventually you are going to hit the spell damaging, and if it's a melee warrior especially, you will be able to do a lot of damage to it. And now that I think about it, can this thing be used against Orchendor? I don't know. Maybe it can actually be used, because I mentioned Orchendor. Like, the whole thing about the Spellbreaker quest is that Orchendor is a pain in the ass to kill. If you can turn him into a sweet roll, would that then mean that the Waba Jack is just the #1 best thing in the whole goddamn game? Because you can just save scum that fight. You can try your best to try and get one of the turning effects, and then just kill Orchendor that way, making the fight significantly easier. Maybe you can't use it in that sense, I'm not sure. But I would highly recommend this thing. It can make getting the Mage of Molag Bal easier, right? It can, when you're fighting the higher tiers of Force 1, it can make getting the Ring of Nymeria easier. It can make, you can use it against the giant in the Volendrunk quest. You can just keep backing up away from the giant, you know, jumping on rocks or whatever. And giants cannot be turned into sweet rolls, so every single attack you get is going to do damage to the giant, equivalent to if you were playing on adept difficulty. Fantastic. Absolute S tier. Highly recommended. That's all for the list. Now get out of here.